Oh yeah, I saw the poster. It said "Our Warrior Within," and then it said Melissa Moses Reignite. I was like, I hope people don't think that's part of my last name. Melissa Moses Reignite.
All right. Well, we are live. So, can you see? So, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Native Wellness Institute Power Hour. I am so excited today. We have a very special guest with us, Melissa Moses, who is going to be talking about the warrior within, reigniting that warrior within. She's an incredible young woman who teaches self-defense for women all across Canada. And she even was able to do a presentation to all the chiefs. And she's going to talk a little bit about, her story and what's going on. But first of all, we have done over 200 power hours with the Native Wellness Institute since this pandemic has started. And so we continue to bring wellness and love and light into people's homes, into the virtual world. And so I'm really excited that Melissa's joining us today. So welcome, Melissa, and would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to Power Hour. This is going to be exciting. Well, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls has brought to our attention the tragic levels of violence faced by our Indigenous people across Canada and the United States today, including First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and Native American communities. And it's been described by our leaders as a Canadian national crisis and a Canadian genocide here in Canada. I'm Crew Melissa Moses. I'm the founder and owner of Nicola Valley Muay Thai and Self-Defense. I'm the first Indigenous female Muay Thai instructor to be certified and recognized by the Sport Authority of Thailand and the Nakanamatum Association and the United Southeast Asia Culture Association in both Canada and the United States. My passion is to help high-risk Indigenous women and youth build the ability and confidence to protect themselves through self-defense techniques, heightened awareness, and through empowerment. And I'm an Inglekam Silk and Stetlium woman. I'm born here and raised here in the heart of the Nicola Valley, and I'm a proud member of the Lower Nicola Indian Band. And I strongly believe that everything has happened in my life that has led me to this point, and it never made sense to me in my youth, but when I look back, it seems to all make sense now. And Steve Jobs quoted it perfectly. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Next to my desk, I have a picture of me when I must have been 4 years old, smiling, wearing a pink t-shirt, pink shorts, and a couple of lopsided braided pigtails. To someone who sees the picture, it's a beautiful reminder of how cute and happy I must have been. But to me, it's a reminder of why I do what I do. Let's fast forward to my preteens. I remember I was with my older brother and this man walked up to us that we had not seen in a very long time. All of a sudden, my body began to shake uncontrollably like a scared little mouse. Suppressed memories started flooding through my head of a sexual predator invading my space and my 4 or 5-year-old body without my consent. I was triggered, and I remembered how I was sexually abused as a child by this man who had groomed my family and set out to test my boundaries, gain my trust so he can manipulate, exploit, and abuse me. My innocence was tampered. I did not know how to communicate what was happening to me as a little girl, and therefore my defenses were broken down, which left me a victim for further abuse in forms of verbal abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, coercion, bullying, sexual assault, and even domestic abuse. The little girl is a reminder of why I do what I do. Here's a quote here that I like to share. To those who abuse, the sin is yours, the crime is yours, and the shame is yours. To those who protect the perpetrators, blaming the victim only masks the evil within, making you as guilty as those who abuse. Stand up for the innocent or go down with the rest. Flora Jessup. October 13th, 2001, the disappearance of 16-year-old First Nations teenage girl sparked a police investigation and a massive search effort by the Nicola Valley First Nations community. Her partially closed body was found covered with rocks, logs, and leaves in a clearing off a dirt road on October 21st, 2001. Forensic examination revealed that she was strangled from behind, suffered multiple injuries, including a skull fracture and brain hemorrhage, which caused by being hit with a large rock found near her body. I was 15 years old at the time, but I remember my cousin was kidnapped, raped, and murdered. A non-Indigenous man took part in a horrendous deed, not just against my cousin, but against the very roots of our society. The death of a child, like my cousin, is a blow to family and community. We will never see her potential or dreams fulfilled. Everything a family dreams of has been taken away. Daughters, nieces, even sons, no one feels safe. Everybody has to look over their shoulders because of people like my cousin's murderer. She is a reminder of why I do what I do. And May 2018, probably a few months before I made the leap to return to Canada to teach self-defense, Elder Representative for the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, George Saddleman, had a long conversation with me around a fire at my uncle's wake. Looking over Douglas Lake, he asked me if I still had this soapstone bear he gave me when I was like 8 years old, and I said yes, I do. And that was around the same time my mom sent me into Taekwondo lessons for the first time at 8 years old. So this marked a really important time in my life. And Elder George said, our First Nations community needs self-defense and heightened awareness and empowerment. He said, but first you need to understand our children and families. He says, you need to go back to the root. And he's like, in your teachings, you need to discuss, you need to have discussions, you need to incorporate the perspectives of the 4 food chiefs so voices get heard and all perspectives are given equal respect and inclusion. The next day, Elder George gave me a book titled Go Back to the Root. I was mourning the passing of a family member, so I forgot to read it. It wasn't until his passing a few months later that I remembered about the book and our conversation. I remember reading the book and praying to George, like, how am I supposed to use the perspectives of the 4 food chiefs in my teachings and discussions? Then a poster popped out of nowhere about a Path Forward Women and Girls Safety Community Session facilitated by former women's representative for the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, Elaine Alec. She was holding the session in Merritt. And Elaine demonstrated the importance of incorporating the perspectives of the 4 food chiefs in our teachings. And she helped participants identify which of the 4 food chiefs best represented their own tendencies. And I remember her saying I was Chief Spring Salmon, exemplifying readiness, determination, and taking action. And I remember thinking back, I was like, Elder George, I now understand. And I understand now what it means to go back to the root. And he was a reminder of why I do what I do. Our life experiences dealing with the good and the bad made us become stronger in so many ways. At times I asked the Creator, why me? Well, let me tell you, it's okay to tell your story, because if you wait to tell your story until no one will be made uncomfortable by it, it will never be told. It's okay to tell your story because it can bring healing and break shame. It's okay to tell your story because it shines a light into dark places, creates healthier communities, and empowers those to break the silence. It's okay to tell your story to bring awareness that abuse is a serious problem in our society and to promote understandings of the different types of abuse. It's okay to tell your story to create safer communities. To all survivors of abuse, it's always okay to tell your stories. It should always be your choice alone, and it should always be for your own good. Don't be sorry. Don't apologize when you share your story. I returned to Canada after 15 years of traveling abroad, and I've dedicated my life to developing self-defense programs that promote healing and self-empowerment for at-risk Indigenous women and youth. For the last 27 years, I've sharpened my skills, continued learning practical self-defense methods from Taekwondo, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Western boxing, Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do, Filipino Kali, Hawaiian Kaju Kenbo, and more. But I started my work September 2018, and that was my first year of business, coming back home to Canada here in the Nicola Valley. And someone had asked me, how many people are you teaching, or how many people have you taught in your first year? And I was like, I'm like, I don't even know. Like, I'd have to go back and look at all the sign-in sheets and the, the seminars and all that I've taught. And I had taught 600 women and youth who have rotated through my programs, including elementary and high school programs here in the Nicola Valley alone. And in my second year after that, I started, there was a demand outside of the Nicola Valley, so I started teaching seminars outside the valley. And I ran for women's representative for the Unit of BC Indian Chiefs. And it was funny how that all happened, but I remember Elaine said she was going to step down, and I said, well, who's going to continue your work? She had this amazing plan. She did these great sessions, and her and Kula Lewis, they really set the bar high for women's rep. And I was kind of concerned, like, well, who's going to continue the work for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls? And so I decided to run for women's representative, and I talked to our chiefs of British Columbia, and I said, can you imagine, with your help, I could reach every reserve in British Columbia and play a pivotal role in the safety of our Indigenous women and youth. And it was there for the first time, and I think I was like 33. Nope, I just turned 34. And I shared my story publicly, what happened to me when I was a little girl. And I've shared it with immediate family, but I hadn't shared it with the public. But I was inspired by one of our Indigenous men in our community. He's one of the first professional rodeo clowns to be recognized in Canada, the first First Nations man, and he survived an avalanche. Like, he was buried and they found him, and he survived. So he had some pretty life-changing moments in his life. But I remember him telling me, he's like, Melissa, he's like, you need to share your story, like, he's like, this is what happened to me when I was little. And he's like, I wish I could have shared my story at a younger age and not wait till I was, close to my 50s. And he's like, once you do, it's like a freeing experience. And I think I was 32 at the time. And I was like, I don't think I'm ready. I don't think I'm ready to share my story, like, and he's like, but when you do, he's like, you'll know what I'm talking about. He's like, you'll feel free. And it was so funny when I had to do my speech for a women's representative, I shared my story to to a room full of chiefs of British Columbia. You know, there was probably 50 plus people that were in that room. And I remember they said I only had 5 minutes. So I shared the same stories that I shared with you just now. And I remember I was shaking, and I remember I was talking really fast. Like I couldn't even, I couldn't really slow down. I just remembered like my whole body was just shaking, but I felt like I had to say it. I just felt like that was the moment. And it was after I was elected in. I had a bunch of our chiefs, our men, come up and shake my hands and said that, you know, I voted for you. And then they shared their stories of what happened to them when they were little kids, when they're young. And they said that was the first time they said anything to anybody. And these chiefs were probably, as you know, they were probably the same age as my parents. And it was that was a pivotal moment, you know, for our men, our men in leadership to share their stories. And
So Melissa, what kind of stories, like what did they tell you? Like what kind of things had happened to them is what?
yes, like their sexual abuse that happened to them when they were younger. And so it was an empowering moment, but it also, because I worked with a lot of women and girls, and you know, because we hear missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. You know, we don't hear like up here in Canada, you don't hear missing and murdered, you know, men and boys, or you know, you don't hear too much of. I know in the States, for the first time, I heard missing and murdered Indigenous people. I know someone used. They're like, oh, the MMIP. And I'm like, what does P stand for? Because all I've been hearing was MMIWG. And they said people. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I've been, you know, so focused on women and girls that, you know, this is happening to our men and boys as well. And yeah, it really changed how I look at things now. But I'm often asked, like, what's the number one self-defense move that you would teach somebody? And a lot of people think it's a physical move, but it's not. It really isn't. It's really like, it's something that you can do now. Just like you can kind of slouch over in your chair, kind of look down. You know, you kind of feel a little enclosed. Like, what's the first words that come to mind for you when you're in this position? What's the first words?
Like sad, alone.
Sad, alone. Like you have like no energy. You know, it kind of feels a little depressing in this posture, right? Well, there's research, you know, there's scientific research that says, like, when you're in this position, your body's releasing chemicals that make you feel bad about yourself. Okay. Now, if you pull your shoulders back and your chin up, and you take a deep breath in, what are the first words that come to mind when you're in this position?
Relief, strength.
Yes, exactly. And you feel like almost like an instant energy. You feel a little bit more confident, you know. And again, there's research that proves that there's chemicals that are being released in our bodies that makes us feel good. Okay. And so if you can feel this in just a matter of seconds of changing your posture, this is a whole game changer, because 65% of communication is by your body language and nonverbal cues. So again, shoulders back, head up high. Your body language is confident. Okay, when attackers are, they've done research on it, and they asked attackers, what is it that you look for in a victim? And they showed them all the same pictures, they showed them all the same videos, and they pretty much nearly chose all the same people. And they're asked why. Well, one, they're distracted, and two, they're they carry themselves like a victim, like they have the victim mentality, right? They're playing on their phones, they got their headphones in, sometimes they might have a hoodie on, they're just distracted, and they don't carry themselves very strong. And
So Melissa,
they
one question I would have then is, so I notice when there are young people are any type of a person who has been sexually abused, their natural, like their reserve, their that is their natural, like they can't, like they have a hard time doing this. So like being confident. So what would be your suggestions for those of us who have been sexually abused, those of us who have have a low self-esteem because of our sexual abuse? Like what can young people do, what can women, men do to have that self-confidence?
right. uh Healing. Healing is the answer to trauma, to unresolved trauma. uh we we want to become whole. Healing, it helps us remove that unbalance from ourselves and bring wholeness back to our body, mind, heart, and spirit. So like Native Wellness Institute, like the work that you're doing, it's it, it it's a model for our lifestyle. Like it's so important that we get onto this, our healing path. But to recognize that you need to go to start your healing journey. And like, you can tell, like you said, if you look around in your communities, you look on the streets, you can see those people that are not carrying themselves very strong. And there's so many layers to just this, right? Like for me, when I was told, when I started learning self-defense, they said, you need to start carrying yourself stronger, shoulders back, head up high. And for me, at first, it felt really awkward, right? Because I was so used to this for so long, for so many years, and I didn't realize I was doing it. Nobody told me like shoulders back, head up high, be aware of your surroundings. And so once it's more like a mindset. It's like working out. You have to train yourself. Like maybe you're doing it right now, shoulders back, head up high, and then we go 5 minutes into watching this video, and then all of a sudden you're back to this position, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, shoulders back, head up high. You're creating a new habit. Okay. And this comes down to mindset, like having a strong mindset, training your body, starting to get yourself into that muscle memory, and yeah, living by that warrior spirit. Being positive and productive and proactive. And for me, I understand that there's the historical trauma, right? We've got the massacre, disease, treaties, policies, residential schools here in Canada, child sexual abuse, and then which leads into current day trauma, like, as you know, racism, lateral violence and oppression, alcohol and substance abuse, gossip, bullying, all those unresolved trauma it's like Elder George said, go back to the root. So we have to go back to these traumas, and because hurt people hurt people. So if we're not working on ourselves, if we're not caring for ourselves, we're going to project that out to our communities. And so it's very important that we start breaking these cycles, because that's going to be a huge huge thing in self-defense for Indigenous communities. When I taught in the States, I didn't teach Indigenous people in the States. All my students were non-Indigenous. So when I moved back home to Canada, I remember teaching my first self-defense seminar, and I was like praying to the creator. I was like, just give me 10 people, like, please, 10 people show up at least, right? And 50 women and girls showed up. And I was blown away, and I was almost in tears. And I remember the person next to me like, what's wrong, Melissa? And I'm like, you have no idea what's happening right now. I was like, this is a historical moment. I'm like, and I don't think people are realizing it. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I've been training since I was 8 years old, and I'm, I think I was like 32, 33. And I was like, I've only ever trained with 5 Indigenous people in my life, and they were boys or men. And I said, they were not women or girls. And I said, and right now there's 50 Indigenous women and girls in this room here to learn martial arts and self-defense. And I was like, I'm blown away. I thought only 10 were going to show up, but having that moment and teaching those girls, like, we have to understand and go back to the trauma that's happened in our communities, and recognize that. And even like our parents, like maybe my parents might not ever recover fully from the trauma that happened to them. Like my mom was a residential school survivor, and she has her triggering moments, and she's done her best to raise me. But as I got older, like I recognized, like, oh, like my mom wasn't a bad person for some of the things, like some of the choices that she did or my dad did. And it's like, okay, I'm old enough now, I can break those cycles. I can start changing, and I can start sharing what I've learned with other Indigenous women and girls, because that's what it comes down to, setting the boundaries. Okay, like setting boundaries is another huge thing that a lot of our Indigenous people don't do. So being able to say, like verbally say, stop, like just stop. You ask girls or women to do this, or even boy, like, kids, and they're like, stop, hee, and they're giggling. And it's like, no, nobody's going to stop. No one's going to believe you, because there's no assertiveness in your voice. Like when you want someone to stop, you have to mean it, like stop, and then people will stop, and they'll respect those boundaries. And it's funny because I remember I was at a gathering, and there was this older man from the community that I haven't seen since I left, because I've been away for 15 years. And he tried to come up and give me a hug, but I don't know this person and well enough for me to feel comfortable to give them a hug. I'm very selective on who gets hugs from me or who comes into my space. And I remember putting out my hand, and my hand like went like on his chest, and he was like just kind of staggered back a little bit. And he's like, oh, I was just trying to give you a hug. I'm like, well, this is my space. That's your space. I won't go into yours. Don't come into mine. And he was like, whoa. And I remember the men that were around there, they kind of had that uncomfortable, like, laugh. And, but, that was my boundary. I was going to set my boundary. And we have to remember that we're always being watched by other women, by other little girls, by just people are always watching. And it didn't dawn on me that that I was impacting one person's life in that moment by setting that boundary. And this Indigenous woman, who's probably, old enough to be my aunt, and she came up next to me, and she saw that. And for her, it was such an impactful moment for her to witness. And she just shared her story with me of what had happened. She's still to this day, she must be in her 40s, sees her abuser within our town, within our Indigenous communities, within, like, at Indigenous events, and she was telling me, like, that she never knew how to set boundaries or be able to tell people, like, this is my space, stay out of it. And so for her to see that, she yeah, I thought that was a powerful thing. So we lead by example. And this is one of the things I tell our chiefs all the time. I'm like, we need to lead by example. If you go back to your communities, you see our youth, or you see our people carrying themselves like slouched over, distracted, tell them to pull their shoulders back, head up high, empower them. And our language and our culture is such an empowering thing for us. Like, going back to our traditional ways, like I always use our medicine wheel, for example, like, especially emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental, because that is similar to our training in martial arts. You need to have that balance. So if you don't have that emotional balance, or the spiritual balance, or the mental, or the physical, like, everything is off. And so we
Melissa,
need to go back to that. Yeah.
so I'm just like replaying what that whole story you just said, like about, like when if it's your abuser, like, so if it's your relative, it's your uncle or your cousin, or that, when you walk into a room and that person is there, like, what do you do? How do you, like, or even if the, like how do you get the courage to, like, to do what you did?
To
Where
get
do
that
you,
power back.
yeah,
Get
like,
your power back.
so what did
Um,
you go through in your mind? Like, did you, like did you go through something in your mind? Like, did you just, like, tell yourself, like, this is, I need to be strong, I need to put my like, can you kind of talk about that a little bit? Like, what do you do, and what do you tell young people, or people, when that abuser's in the room? Like, how do they set the boundaries?
right. Well, when you come across people who run into their abusers, my abuser is not living today. My He had actually sexually assaulted other kids, other children. And, well, guess what? Children don't stay children for very long. They grow up. And one of the men that he had abused as a little kid actually beat him up really bad, that he ended up in the hospital, and never really recovered, and he ended up dying. But I do remember, like, when I ran into my abuser, I would shake, my whole body would shake, I'd be triggered. But uh, what I would tell, and I can use one of the examples of one of my students. She was abused by her uncle at 10 years old. And she 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 didn't come out and say, or she didn't get that empowerment to say anything. Like, she kind of went down that, that darker path, like drinking, drugs, and, things like that. Even trying to commit suicide because she was being triggered by her abuse from her uncle, who comes from a very big family, an aggressive family. And her mom had brought her to one of my self-defense classes that that I had on my family's property. And I was only up here visiting on weekends at the time, from the States. And I remember she went through my class, and her mom contacted me afterwards. She's like, I don't know what you did, but I got my daughter back. And I was like, I don't know what you mean. I'm like, all I did was just teach martial arts and teach self-defense and teach, how to say stop, block, frame, and how, just doing what I do. And she told me what had happened to her daughter. And her daughter actually felt empowered again. Like, the best way to explain, like, when you go through something like that, it's almost like you become tired and exhausted, and you just don't have the energy. And I always call it like, awakening, like an awakening. Like, in my culture, we use a fir bough, and we tap the fir bough, on our heart to wake up our heart, tap, on our head to wake up our mind and our spirit. We're tapping us all over, wake up, wake up. And and I try to teach that in my classes, wake yourself up, get that power back, feel that energy. And I found out after that she had reported her abuser, and she was 13. And she brought her abuser to court. And she continued taking my classes. And I noticed these, when she was being triggered, or I knew when she had to go to court to face her abuser and retell her story of what happened to her, because she'd be triggered and she'd go back to drinking and drugs, and even tried to commit suicide. And she's only a teenage girl. And I remember she didn't show up to one of my classes, and I contacted her mom. She's like, well, she's in the hospital. She tried to commit suicide last night, and I had to bring her to the hospital. And we're on our way back home now. And I was like, bring her here. Like, I just had that feeling, like, just bring her here, like, bring her to the studio. And she's like, are you sure? I was like, yep, just bring her here. And I remember seeing this beautiful Indigenous young teenage lady, this young lady, and she looks broken. You can just see it. Her spirit just looked broken. And I remember I wrapped up her hands. I wrapped her hands up, and I put her in some Muay Thai gloves, and I put her in front of the bag. And I said, I'm like, I know what you're feeling. I said, you have all these emotions and all this stuff building up inside you, and you're facing your abuser for the first, like, again. And you're sharing your story. I was like, it's hard. It's going to be hard. And I was like, but think of it this way. You're setting an example for other women. I'm like, there could be two ways this could go. Your abuser will do time, or your abuser will get let go and be free. I said, but you are heightening people's awareness about this person, and by sharing your story, other women and other girls are going to come forward. And I said, that being said, I want you to just release all that frustration, all that anger. If you cry, you want to scream, you want to do all that. I was like, take it out on the Muay Thai bag, just go at it, give her. And she did. She beat the hell out of that Muay Thai heavy bag. And she broke down crying, just all that built up emotions. And she said, I'm afraid to face them. I'm afraid to face the family because they're aggressive and they're like bullies. And I said, you know what? I was like, on your behalf and your mom, with your mom's permission, I'd like to contact the Bikers Against Child Abuse. And they're like, yes, please go ahead, like, contact them. And this is the first time I've ever reached out to them. And I remember another Indigenous man in Washington told me, like, Melissa, I know the president of the Bikers Against Child Abuse. Like, if you ever need his contact, just, hit me up and let me know. And I told him, I was like, I need that contact. I contacted them. I said, I have a teenage girl who's about to face her abuser in a week. I was like, I heard the work that you guys do. Is this something that you can help with? And 40 plus bikers showed up in front of the courthouse for my student, and they walked in, and just the support from these 40 plus strangers. I remember my student came straight to my studio right after, and she's like, "Crew Melissa, you're not gonna believe what happened." I'm like, "Well, tell me, like, what happened?" She's like, "I walked in there." She's like, "You know how you say walk tall with your shoulders back, your head up high?" And she's like, "I felt empowered. I took my power back. I wasn't scared anymore." And I walked in there, and these bikers were walking behind me, and they surrounded me and sat around me and create this boundary between me and my abuser. And I was able to go up and sit and tell my story. And I was like, wow. I was like, that's all she needed, was that support, you know? And she took her life back. She took her power back. And it takes those types of moments that to really be able to move on, you know, do this healing journey. And she's, you know, and she contacted me probably a couple months ago, and she's doing really well. And by doing that, by sharing her story, she inspired one of her friends, and who is a non-Indigenous young girl. And I had found out that she was being sexually abused by her stepdad for many years. And it was watching her friend, you know, facing her abuser, taking her abuser to court, and having the Bikers Against Child Abuse to support her. She too contacted the Bikers Against Child Abuse and brought her stepdad to court. And I remember her mom came up to me, and I didn't know who this lady was. And she's like, "I just wanted to say thank you." And I'm like, "Thank you for what?" I'm like, "I don't even know who you are." You know? And she's like, "I just want to say thank you." I was like, my daughter is friends with one of your students who inspired my daughter to come forward and really empowered. And I was just like, wow, you know, it just takes one person, right? And then it starts this effect, like this ripple effect in the world. So that being said, boundaries is very important. Finding your voice, getting that power back. And I remember like some of the people in my community, like they say, like, "Melissa, like when you have those memories pop up from your past, you know, those triggering moments, call your spirit back." And I'm like, I thought that's only like when you go traveling somewhere and you leave there and you're like, call your spirit back, right? They're like, no, it works with memories as well. Because if you're stuck in the abuse that you experienced growing up and throughout your life, you're stuck there. You're part of your spirit stuck there. So call your spirit back every time you have those recalling those memories. So it's like, you know, Tweak Melissa, you know, and they said that's part of your healing as well. And I really do believe that, because I've been having less and less memory recalls, if that makes sense. And they said that I was told that once I've really healed, I won't be having those types of memories anymore. Like, you know, so I really do believe that's helping me become whole again. You know, getting that wholeness in body, mind, heart, and spirit again. But yeah. But reigniting our warrior within, like, it was funny. I ran into, well, I was in instructor training in Toronto, and I ran into a 5-time world champion, Clifton Brown, for Canada. And he asked me about my story, and he's like, "I heard you're teaching self-defense to your Indigenous communities." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Your story really, really impacted me." He's like, "You know, when I went home," he's like, all I could think about was your story in your Indigenous community, because he was an immigrant from Jamaica to Canada. And he says, my people experience similar things as your Indigenous people here in Canada. And he's like, but I want you to like, he's like, I read your shirt, because I have on the back of my shirts, my school shirts, like warrior within, live full, die empty. And he's like, that warrior within, he's like, your people have always had that warrior within. He's like, you need to reignite your warrior within. And I was like, wow. I was like, yeah, I'm like, you're right. You know, we need that awakening. We need to awaken our spirits again, and go from being slouched over to carrying ourselves strong again. Because I was thinking, like, missing and murder, why are there so much, like, why are we so high in the statistics for missing and murdered? And it's because we're those ideal targets. You know, I hate to say it, but a lot of times we're distracted. Like I pointed out to my students, I'm like, I saw you walking downtown Main Street. I was like, what were you looking at? Your shoes? Were you looking at your shoes? Like, was there something on your shoes? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, the whole block you walked looking down at your shoes. And they're like, I didn't realize I did that. I was like, you need to shoulders back, head up high, and be aware of your surroundings. And I remember he went back to his mom, and his mom, you know, ran into me. She's like, yeah, she's like, my son came home and he's like, Mom, you know, do I look at my shoes all the time? And she's like, well, what do you mean? She's like, well, crew Melissa said I was looking at my shoes a whole block. And she's like, yeah. She's like, well, what does that mean? He's like, she told me shoulders back, head up high, and be aware of my surroundings. And yeah, I mean, things like that, like people don't realize. And he was one of my students that were going down a really dark path. And I remember the principal at his school was like, Melissa, I need you to come here. Here's a list of the high risk youth. Like, you know, these, like, we want you to try to get them into your program or excite them about your program. And like, we really think that martial arts is going to help. And I'm like, okay. I was like, well, let's see. I remember this kid came in, he's like, this is stupid. Muay Thai is stupid. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is stupid. And I was like, all right, I'm like, just give me one class. All right. Give me one whole, like 2 hours of your time today, 1 hour for Muay Thai, 1 hour Jiu-Jitsu. And I said, and then if you don't like it, no hard feelings, you don't have to show up again. Right. And he kept showing up, you know, this kid. And now he's actually like messaging me right now, like, crew Melissa, like when are you going to start your classes up again? Like, well, you know, like the principal, you know, your school district said that we have to wait till a vaccine has been created before we can start the programs up again in the school. But, you know, being excited and going, and to see that, like going from looking down at your shoes and going down that dark path to, you know, walking tall and strong and making a difference. Like he started doing some like reading program, like reading to little kids, and he's in high school. And like, that was something that wasn't cool before. And now he's like, you know, we can make a difference in the world. Verbal self-defense is really important. So I said set boundaries, but verbal self-defense, it's critical. And I like to teach a 3-part statement when I teach this. And that's 1, state the behavior, and 2, state how it makes you feel, and 3, state the desired outcome. So that's really important. For example,
Melissa, so real quick, we had a question.
oh,
Okay, so one question is, when you have a family member who may not be ready to heal like in a healthy way because they're abusing drugs and alcohol, have you dealt with anybody like that? And like, what can a family member do? Well, and I know when there's addiction, like until that person's ready to heal, like there's nothing really anybody can do but pray for them. But do you have any experience like working with people who are stuck in addiction because of their abuse?
Right. Well, when you're asking that question, there's a story popped up. In my community, there's, I think they call them like the 49ers Club or something like that. And it's a lot of, where First Nations some of them get together, and they have it scheduled out where they meet and they drink, like, all day or for days. And I remember walking or running to one of them, and because some of them were family members. One of them happened to be one of my family members, and I'm like, as someone that wants to make a difference in our communities, and I'm like, I'm afraid some of our youth are going to be doing this exact same thing. How can we help people like yourselves? And they said, just ask us about our stories, like, don't judge us. um, because there's a lot of us, we haven't dealt with some of the trauma that's happened to us, and a lot of them went to residential school, a lot of them were sexually abused. And I remember saying, I'm like, okay, I was like, could you tell me your story? And told me their story, and it was really dark. Like, the things that they experienced was really hard and scary. And I could see why they were doing the things that they were doing, because that was the only thing that they knew how to do. But um but like you said, when it comes to addictions, they can only heal whenever they're ready to do that. But sometimes they just need someone to ask them about their story, how they're doing. And that could be the start that sparks that change, and could be the very thing that will impact them, right? Um, like I said about the pro rodeo clown, he said, once you tell your story, it's like you feel free. It's a freeing experience. And the person that shared their story, well, uh, he he didn't change his life. He says, like, I'm up there in age. He's probably like within his 60s. He's like, but I probably wouldn't stop drinking. I probably wouldn't stop doing this. But the work that you're doing is really important. And I hope that I was able to help educate you how you can reach people. He's like, don't judge them right away. Don't judge them for what their choices, because there's a lot of it. There's a story behind it, and which is really true. I ran into a lady up north when I went to go watch a totem pole raising ceremony for missing murdered Indigenous women and girls in Terrace. And this one lady shared her story, and she said her abuser, who was an Indigenous leader, uh, had abused 163 kids in his lifetime. And out of those 163, only three of them were alive today. And the reason why we knew this numbers was because an RCMP officer was doing an interview with this lady, and he broke down crying, and she's like, why are you crying? He's like, because you're 163rd victim of this one man. And he said, and only three of you are living today. And she says, what happened to the others? Well, they either committed suicide, or they died from substance and alcohol abuse. And so that was really, that really makes you think, like, okay, like we hear about all the victims of like rape, right? But we don't ever talk about the rapist. And we always find the help for the victims, but we don't talk about the help for the perpetrators, right? Like one man affected 163 lives. And I keep thinking about Elder George saying, you need to go back to the root. And I remembered as a self-defense instructor, I'm like, go back to the root. Like, what does that have to do with self-defense? But it has everything to do with it. You know, you go back to the root, the perpetrators, those that did the hurting, because they often have experienced their own type of abuse. And in their mind, they think it's normal, right? But it's not. So we need to get that help for our people that are experiencing things like this. And we need, you know, we focus so much on women and girls that I feel like we often forget about our men and boys, and they need that space as well. They need to be able to share their emotions, because there's a stigma where, like, you know, you got to be a man, men don't cry, they don't share their emotions, right? But really, like, we're in a different time. You know, that it's okay to tell your story, it's okay to show your emotions, it's okay to cry. And because that's all part of our healing, and healing is the answer to our trauma. But yeah.
Wow. That is so powerful, Melissa. Like everything that you have shared with us today is so powerful. And we did have somebody ask where they could get a t-shirt.
Oh, I ran out of t-shirts. I think I only have hoodies left. But yeah, no, I do sell them. But would this be mailed to the States? Because I've only I think I've only ever sold one to the States.
Oh,
And
really? Well,
yeah,
where did they
shipping was
go?
like, what's that?
Where would they go like to
Oh,
order?
I was setting up a shop on my web page, but we decided to take the web page down because we're rebranding for the new year. So I'm hoping in 2021 that we'll have our store
Oh,
online opened up to do that. So, but
okay.
right
Well,
now, yeah, I can sell that directly for sure.
so what would be the best way? Because I can put it in the chat. Like what would be so how can they get a hold of you?
Oh, crew KRU at Nicola Valley Muay Thai. So here's Nicola Valley Muay Thai, MUATHAI.ca. So crew at Nicola Valley Muay Thai.ca. I also, there's a business Facebook page, Nicola Valley Muay Thai as well. So they can contact through Messenger that way, or Instagram as well, Nicola Valley Muay Thai. So
Okay.
those are
So
the
I
two.
think I did so it's Nikolai Valley. What was the last part?
Muay Thai, MUAY
Yeah, I didn't get that part in.
THAI.
So it's MOUA Thai. And
Yeah,
um
MUAY.
oh, M- oh yeah, my phone is having a hard time. So we can, and you know what you can do, Melissa, is after we post this, then you can go in on the comments as well, and you can correct if like you can put it the right way, and that might be easier. So then people can know where to go to find you. So but I just, Melissa, you are incredible, you are beautiful, you everything you said today is inspiring, and I hope that, just like you said, with what you said, I hope that that pebble will be dropped into the water and the ripple effects will go out, and more young people will go into martial arts and go into learning, or even just more people will just walk prouder. And like this whole hour I've been conscious now of being of being tall and proud. So that was beautiful. And I just want to say lim lemshin chas paus telichast. Thank you from my heart, Melissa, for sharing your words and your spirit, and to that little girl inside of you who was brave enough to tell her story and to help so many people across Canada. And I'm sure now across the United States with this Power Hour. And so thank you, Melissa, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, LoVina. I really appreciate the invite.
Yes. And is there any last thing you want to say to everybody?
Well, the one thing that I live by is just believe, and belief will get you there.
That's beautiful. Oh, thank you so much. And we want to
Awesome.
thank everybody for joining us today. We hope you have a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year. Hopefully you got all your gifts and everything. But it's not about the gift, it's about the love that we share with one another. So thank you
Yes.
all. We love you guys. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.